No. There we go.
We're on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Good morning, and I would like to welcome Dr. Jason Rodker to our monthly workshop, Mondays on Education. This time we will talk about the power of play.
So I'll give just a brief little introduction about myself, and then I'll say a couple words about kind of what we'll cover today, and then actually we're going to get right into an activity first before we really get to any content or information. So some people here and some people watching probably have been to the previous talks on play here at the Cottage School. So today we may cover some of what we've talked about in the past, but there's also going to be some things that are different today, so hopefully it won't just be redundant. Hopefully there'll be some new stuff today too. So just a little bit about me. During my doctoral training at Pace University, I worked in different settings. I worked in school settings. I also worked in community mental health centers. And during my training, a lot of my work focused on early childhood. So kids 0 to 3, 0 to 7, and their parents. So that's kind of my foundation is kind of in early child development. And, you know, obviously the role of play in those early years is so big. So I really enjoy talking about this topic, and it really is relevant to my work. Professionally, also personally, it's very relevant now raising a child. I have a 3-year-old son. This is a fun topic. So I currently am working in private practice with mostly kids and teenagers, some adults also. So a lot of my work focuses on working with families and building family relationships, parent-child relationships, and play is a vital part of that also. So relationships and play are very much interconnected. And so we'll be talking specifically also about the role of play in building relationships and the power that relationships have to enhance children's play and the ways that dynamic, that interplay can really be valuable for kids. So I encourage people online, I'll pause for just a few moments in case anyone online has access to Play-Doh or clay or any kind of molding material. Now would be a time to reach for that. Because the people here are going to get some Play-Doh, but obviously the people online I can't give you Play-Doh. But if you have any at home, now would be the time to grab it. So we'll do, later in the year, I know here at the Cottage School there's going to be some talks on mindfulness. Right now we're going to do a bit of a mindfulness activity, a mindful play activity. So we're going to begin playing right now by playing catch. I'll just toss out some Play-Doh. So before you open the Play-Doh, so this is where the mindful piece is going to come in. We're going to kind of take this slowly. We're going to pause for a moment, and what I'd like you to do as you open the Play-Doh is to, actually before you even open the Play-Doh, just with it in your hand right now, just kind of pause for a moment, take a couple of breaths in and out, and just kind of reflect on what's going on inside of you right now as you anticipate opening the Play-Doh. Whatever thoughts, feelings may be coming up, whatever urges to open it, whatever you anticipate when you open it, maybe you have some ideas already about what's going to happen when you open it. I know for me, the smell of the Play-Doh as soon as I open it, that's kind of what I always kind of think of when I think of Play-Doh. For some reason I think of the smell of the freshly opened can of Play-Doh. So whatever's coming up for you right now, just kind of be mindful of that. And then as you open it also, try to stay in that mindful place. And in addition to focusing on the actual Play-Doh, also reflect on whatever thoughts, feelings, ideas, urges are coming up as you open it and you begin to take it out and then play with it also. So go ahead, we'll open our Play-Doh with those things in mind. So for the people online, I'm sorry that you won't necessarily be taking part in the experiential pieces that we're doing, but remember that also you can chime in with questions and comments online. How do they do that? Would they? I guess-
I'll get a little notification
Yeah,
that
okay.
they have a comment.
So feel free to chime in with questions, and you can become part of the discussion today also.
Do we have viewers there?
One.
So, would anyone like to share anything that you've kind of noticed in terms of thoughts, feelings, memories, urges, anything that's come up as you?
With the Play-Doh?
Yeah, with the Play-Doh, just in these first few moments with the Play-Doh.
Well, before opening, I thought, okay, I'm gonna get my hands on the dough, which I love. And I've been doing pottery, so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try and see if, in the wheel you make a bowl for the first time. That's usually what you do. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try. And I thought, okay, I don't know if I'm gonna make a wall, but I'm gonna try. We just made Play-Doh this morning in the school too.
Oh yeah.
We make our own Play-Doh, so every time I boil, and I thought about that too, because I'm not familiar with the smell of these little Play-Dohs. We haven't used them. I don't know if we ever used them actually, but we make our own Play-Doh with. I usually bring the juice from the beets. You know when you boil the beets.
Right.
So it has a very nice red.
That is beautiful. It's a stunning color.
Everybody caught
Isn't it so beautiful? And now the yellow beets also leave so much. So we used that. Connie was making it this morning. No, I should have thought about that. I'm not. Do they have all different smells?
I think they all pretty much smell the same. Just that generic Play-Doh smell. Yeah. Anybody else? What else kind of came up for you as you?
I mean, if you're talking about being mindful, the honest thoughts that popped into my head, my first thought was, oh, what am I going to make? What am I going to make? What am I going to make that's different? Because I always end up doing the same thing over and over again. And then when I was opening the Play-Doh, the next thought, talking about being mindful, I'm thinking, oh, I don't want to get Play-Doh under my nails. I don't like that feeling. And it's hard to get it. It's hard to get it out of the.
Without using your nails.
Exactly, and it's hard to get it out of here. So that was the other unfortunate thought that went through my head. And now I'm thinking, oh, okay, Play-Doh's nice. I like the soft Play-Doh. I like these little cups bigger than the bigger ones because the bigger ones are harder to.
Crusty.
They get crusty and they're harder to mold. So I like the little cups because they're softer for whatever reason. But that's mine.
Get it
Yeah,
out.
thank you. Anyone else? Anything?
Well, my son loves the Play-Doh, so the first thought that came, I just remembered him, though he's right here. And he plays with Play-Doh pretty much every single day, and he's been playing forever now. And the second thought that came was, oh, it's such a lovely color. I don't really have anything in this color, and maybe I should buy something.
I love hopping.
I know.
So, Anaga, do you make dough at home? Or?
Every single day, because I make
I thought so, because the first
Indian
thing
bread
I
at
did,
home, and he eats it for lunch every single day.
because when Bharat first started, he loved the Play-Doh.
Yes.
And he would play with Play-Doh. He was really, and I always thought, okay, he probably at home has access to
He can
dough.
make it himself.
He can make it himself.
Yeah, he makes
So my
it.
mother also had dough available for us all the time. You know, you can just make any dough with flour and water, and that will be Play-Doh.
And
If you
one of
add
his-
oil and a little bit of
Tell me
water,
how to do
then
that.
it's
If I'm rolling the bread, actually he has like a small pin and like a base, and he will take some dough and he will roll his own bread too sometimes with me, and then
you know,
he
I
actually
didn't know, and I always meant to ask you, and I'm glad
Yeah.
I asked you today because
he loves it.
So a lot. I mean, just in just a couple of minutes with the Play-Doh, even before you opened it, you started noticing some things, and now playing with it. So just in this couple minutes, so much has come up. There was, I heard someone mention not wanting to get it under their nails. So there's some self-reflection there. There's some learning potentially. You know, if you were a young child who didn't yet know that really about yourself, you might learn during the course of playing with Play-Doh that, oh, I really don't like getting that under my nails. So there's some self-learning involved. The anticipation of what you might do with the Play-Doh, you know, the thinking about, oh, what am I going to make? The connection to others came up too. The Play-Doh reminds you sometimes of a relationship to someone important to you. So a sense of connection. And then new ideas too. I heard people talking about, well, I might make something different than I've always made in the past. What might that be? And you start imagining what you might do with it. So much just in these first couple of minutes, barely even really getting into using the Play-Doh yet. So you can imagine for young children how much there is, the anticipation, even just in the anticipation of play, all of the cognition that's happening, all of the self-reflection that's happening. And so I wanted to start with this activity just to highlight how much goes on, for children, how much there is to be gained by giving children the opportunity to play. And in today's day and age, it seems that there's not as much opportunity for kids to play. And so you can already start to get an idea of what they might be missing out on, without those opportunities, So I'll encourage you, as we talk, make something with the Play-Doh. It doesn't matter what it is, just make something. We'll come back to this at the end. We're gonna begin with the Play-Doh, end with the Play-Doh. So one of the most important things to, I think, kind of highlight about play is that it really is a form of communication for kids. Play really is the language of childhood, right? The play materials, whatever it might be, whether it's Play-Doh or blocks or dolls or something else, those really can be the language that children use to communicate, especially in the early years, up until 6 or 7, kids communicate almost primarily through play. They express themselves that way. And often children use metaphor during play. So they use symbols, and objects can represent many things. And so children's play, sometimes through metaphor and symbol, they're communicating that way. So it may not be always completely obvious to us what a child is communicating while they play, but I think it's important just to keep in mind that whatever they're doing is a communication of some kind, and just to respect it in that way, that even if it's not understandable to us immediately, it does have meaning for the child. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as we go. You need some Play-Doh.
I do.
Yes, there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah. So,
I'm sorry, but I thought we started at 10.
oh, that's okay. It's 9:30.
Oh, okay.
That's
Sorry.
right. You're here. That's okay.
We started 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
I just got here a few minutes ago.
Yeah, we started it a little bit late, so feel free to play with your Play-Doh as we talk. So I'd like to hear from people about early childhood play experiences. What kinds of things did you do as children to play, and how does that kind of contrast with what your children today, are doing? Is it similar? Is it very different? So maybe we can go around quickly. Yeah.
One of my favorite memories of playing, I lived in a cul-de-sac and every house had kids. And so every backyard was your backyard. And I remember just playing with all the friends, all the kids in the neighborhood, doing various activities like hide and go seek. And I loved that. And then we moved when I was 10, and we had houses that were further apart, so there was no more neighborhood. So when my husband and I were house hunting, we were looking for a neighborhood because we wanted to be around other kids, and then we moved into our neighborhood. Turns out there weren't a lot of kids there. And then miraculously within the last 6 months, like I said earlier, now we have 2 6-year-old girls in our neighborhood. So and then we live in a cul-de-sac, so I'm hoping, to create something, or at least something similar to what I had when I grew up, because I loved being able to go outside and have those adventures with my friends, no matter what they were, whether they were pretend or hide and go seek, or that was a big deal to me.
Well, obviously I'm a lot older. But I had the similar experience. I grew up in Livingston in a neighborhood, and we would do things like, we had a lot of oak trees, so the girls would collect all the acorns, and the boys would collect, and we'd see who had the most. And then the boys peed on our acorns because we had more acorns than them. Or I would just do a lot of pretend play.
Leo would do that.
And we won, and I thought And then just
My
a lot of
God.
pretend play. And I just retired as a speech therapist, and kids don't really play outside anymore. Like when I would come in on Mondays, I'd say, "What did you do over the weekend?" And I said, "Don't tell me that you stayed inside and played video games, because that's boring to me."
Yeah.
And they had nothing. And they said they had nothing to say.
Right.
And their parents allowed them to do it. They
Yeah,
allowed
that's
them
the
to do
sad
it.
part.
And not only did they allow them to do, these were more kids with special needs. And they're the people those are the children that need to be engaged in some kind of conversation or some kind of active play that the parent is, helping them start. And they literally sat doing Minecraft and some other things that, and their parents let them do it. And they literally told me they would come down to eat. They'd get something to eat, not necessarily with family. They'd just grab something, bring it back up to their room. So it's a very different environment. I worked in a blue collar in Hackettstown, more of a, not blue collar, but more, it's a very different community than here, not quite as affluent.
But it's still here. I think there's a change, because I had, my son is now 19, but I always say that we lived in a farm, right, and he would be in nature all day long, playing with, climbing the trees, playing with the animals there. And then when we moved to the neighborhood, he was about 8, and we thought, okay, great, now he can have kids to play. He would play with the goats before, right, which was fine, but then he would have other kids in the neighborhood to play with. So the first thing he did is he tried the trees in the house, right, he was up in the trees. A few months after we moved, he stopped going to the trees, and I'm like, what, no kids outside whatsoever, and I live 10 minutes away from here. And I'm like, what are these kids doing, right? We thought he was going to be able to ride the bike, climb the trees with somebody else. He would still climb the trees anyway with some kids that finally were climbers too, that he met in the school, and they were his friends, not in the neighborhood, but they would come and climb trees and do that. But it was a very selected group, I will say, with parents that really encouraged that. Because then the rest of the kids were either with video games or with activities, sports, after
that's true
school,
too. That's
all day
true.
long.
Yes.
They didn't have time.
Right.
All activities that
Very-
they really didn't have the
Very
free
structured,
time.
yeah. Usually it's either one or the other. Very structured.
Very
It's
More
a
of that.
mix though, because I feel like I have a good mix of that. Leo plays sports and he goes to activities. He definitely he role plays a lot. Does that make sense? Like, he makes up teams and football games, whether he's inside or outside. He'll go outside. But you saw it.
Yeah.
He has this makeshift football goal with like kitty litter that holds it down. And he kicks the ball, goes back and forth and back and forth. So it is a sport, but he's making it up. Like, he makes up the teams, the games, the score. So he is adding, subtracting. He's doing, that kind of stuff. But he does go to soccer and he just started playing basketball, but it's not constant.
Right. It
it's
helps
a
if
mix.
you have. I had 4 children, so 2 boys and 2 girls that were close in age. So it helps because you've got playmates right in the house.
Yes, you don't need to.
Yeah, and it wasn't that wasn't the issue, but and of course my kids are in their 30s, so there wasn't this computer craze, and there was Nintendo and things like that. But I only let them do it on the weekends, and then if I saw they were doing it too much, I hid the controls, and that was the end of that. But parents, today, that I have seen kindergarten parents, when they pick up their kids from school, the kids rule the roost. It's like, no, you better keep
They may have an
you
iPad
better
in the
keep
car,
that control as long as you can. Because, and you
Mm-hmm.
can give them control. You can say, well, you can give them choices, but choices that you think are appropriate.
Well, I was in church yesterday and I heard this noise. It was completely silent, and I looked to my left, and there's this kid laying on the floor
With an iPad.
with a phone. Like,
with a phone.
Well, yeah, but
The parents' phone?
yes, and nobody's saying anything, and I'm like, oh my god.
Which
But, you could
technology
hear it.
was
It wasn't
going
even on
to
silent.
We didn't. It's inevitable.
anticipated,
Technology is going to
yes.
come into
No,
the
but what I'm
conversation.
saying
Yeah.
is, like you said, now you're in church. Like, you have to. Yes, technology is going to come into it because my son likes it too. So we limit it. Here you go. Play it on the weekend, whatever. But would you ever do it in a? You have to segment it too. You have to have some sense of. Now, how are you going to learn how to play if that's what you're doing, or learn how
No,
to just?
there's-
Even if you're bored to death sitting there, which sometimes we all are, you just have to learn how to do it.
How to be bored too.
Right?
It's very good. The most creative things, are born from
Well, it's-
nothing.
So
from
I didn't
when
mean
you
it as a
have any
technology
choices.
thing as much as a entertain, I don't know what you would say, not letting a child figure it out.
Yeah.
You have
Is
to
that the
know-
way to
Not,
say it?
not
Yeah.
struggling with being bored.
Right, and
You
also
know.
you have to know your audience and where you are. So you act a certain way at the beach, and you don't act that way in your classroom. You talk to your parent different than you're talking to your friend or your teacher. I mean, so they have to have boundaries and they have to be socialized, right? Kids don't grow up coming out of the womb socialized, right? So you do what the best you can through teaching them through play or reading or
Yeah, some of you guys hit on, I think, two of the most common things that come up when we do start comparing the way kids play today to the way that, you know, some of us played when we were younger, which is a lot less outdoor time, and we'll talk more about, you know, why that might be a problem, you know, and then the technology.
I also want to say that socially we are isolated today compared to the earlier times.
Mm.
Like these days you really don't know your neighbors. When I was growing up,
Yeah.
the doors were always open. We could just walk in, walk out. Here you actually call up and take an appointment for a play date. Like
Right,
you set up play
right.
dates 1 week in advance. Like, you know your schedules, and back then it was really not there.
Right.
And I grew up with a sister who is just 2 years older than I am, so we were more like buddies, and we used to just, and that I think my child is an only child and he doesn't get that, so he tends to be more lonely because we really don't know the neighbors. And as you say, the kids in our neighborhood don't really play outside. It's only my son who's in the backyard all the time, whereas, you know, the other kids, I don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're playing video games or they're doing other activities. But it's just that I remember me and my sister, the earliest games I remember was we used to just make up, like playing teacher. I used to be the student, she used to be the teacher, or even like silly games like I used to be the dog, she used to be the master or whatever, like. So just a lot of pretend play and.
well, and also there's more. You're
Over-regulating
more
a little bit.
cautious with your children now. Then there's a different world. You know, you're not going to let your child just roam around the streets because.
Yeah.
Well, safety is
Well, that's
something
true
that
too, you're
has
right, you
changed,
just
you
roam
know,
around.
things, but still,
Yeah.
we are in a
Interesting,
safe
we'll only have
neighborhood.
one child, all of us here.
And I don't
Yeah.
see kids. There's a family that moved recently, and they have the kids outside all the time. They have 4 kids, and they're outside all the time, but
This
very
is
rare. Yeah.
the issue of safety. You know, the idea being that it's not as safe for kids to be outside anymore. I don't know. I wonder if we need to, not here today, we don't really have time to do that, but just generally, do we need to be kind of talking more with each other as adults about, is that a reality, or is this just kind of an anxiety that we have? Is this just an idea, you know, that we have that things are not as safe?
Well, in the schools, it's promoted that it's not as safe.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we are now even in, like on
In the
schools,
schools,
in the
within
schools,
the
rural
school, yeah.
areas, and even here, and even my kids went to Henry for high school, and this never used to be the case, but now it is. You have to be buzzed in, you have to wear a name tag, you have to sign in. Schools have security guards now. You know, there's been a lot.
Metal detectors.
There's,
and
yes,
it's
there's a lot. I
crazy.
mean, the reality is there has been since my kids, certainly since I was younger, and even with my children, there have been many more school shootings that have been devastating across the country. So that's a reality.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's in your neighborhood is a different story.
Yeah.
But the sense of being unsafe is a little bit more. Like when I was growing up, it was bomb shelters, and you'd have air raids, and you'd go under your table at school. So you had that Cold War, or you know, the threat of nuclear war. When I was very young, now it's a different sense of feeling unsafe,
Yeah.
but it's there.
And there's definitely a trade-off too to take into consideration. There definitely is a sense that things are more unsafe, and there are more of these events happening, which we need to take precautions around. But then the way in which we go about trying to make kids safe has its own kind of repercussions. So now all these drills in schools, the security, the heightened security at school, just the intensity of the anxiety in the school environment about these potentially, you know, violent things that can happen. They have their own effect on the kids, you know,
And the teachers.
and the teachers, exactly.
So I always have this question that I know is hard to answer, but I think now the limited time the kids spend playing, and it's been going on for about 15 years at least, right? And that the technology takes over, and the video games, the violent video games that you cannot even believe what they make of, and that they're allowed, you know,
Right.
to be making this kind of video games, and then the
And
kids
parents are
and
allowed.
parents buy it
Yes.
for the kids, but so all of that plus, you know, the lack of playtime, therefore the lack of opportunities to develop social skills, I wonder if it's not that one of the main reasons of, not the only one, but one of the main reasons of why we're seeing more and more people that, you know, start shooting. I mean, I
Yeah.
just wonder what's the
Right.
reason that
Right.
we're seeing this more and more often.
And we all, yeah,
And-
children are more isolated, although they don't think they
Yeah.
are because they're on these video games and they chat with one another. But I dealt with a lot of autistic kids that were on the spectrum, so they weren't, you know, they weren't necessarily what I used to think of autism, but what they have now. And
Yeah.
they are really attracted to video games
Uh-huh.
because they don't like to communicate. They don't want to talk to somebody else. They don't want to. They have trouble understanding what you're asking them, and so this is an easy way for them
Of
to
course.
do something.
Of course.
Instead of a parent saying, okay, you can, like Temple Grandin's parents, you can go into your little world for an hour, but that's it.
And the kids that do have, you know, the social skills, so that they could develop social skills, end up not developing if they are, you know,
No,
stuck,
they don't.
because it creates an addiction. The video games create an addiction, and technology.
And they
In
admit
general.
that, the makers of the video games admit that it is an
So
addiction. They
why
do.
is it allowed? That's why
Well, it's
I
a
don't
free market,
understand.
but parents have to control it, and they don't. So that's the problem. So we can get back to your play.
These are all the concerns, Jason.
It is, no, yeah. When talking about play, it's inevitable that the use of technology comes up, video games come up. Most of the kids that I talk to today, when they use the word game, they're talking about video games. You know, I want a game for Christmas. There's a game I want for Christmas. Or, you know, what did you do over the weekend? Oh, I was playing a game.
Right.
They always mean, that word game always means video game these days. You know, it's never they want, you know, a board game.
You
know,
hear that
they
from
want a video game.
teenagers
Our
or
kids do.
younger
Yeah, our
kids?
Younger, all ages. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
you
yeah.
think games
Yeah.
should
School
clear
age.
them.
Yeah.
So how old do you
No.
think they are when they start with video games?
Oh, young. I mean, I work with 5, 6, 7-year-old
5,
kids
6
who are already on, you know, playing a lot of video games. So yeah, very young.
And do you, when you work with them, do you
And-
encourage the parents not to limit that? I mean, or?
Yeah, often that comes up in conversation. Yeah. But I think, like Laura alluded to, I think the antidote for a lot of this is to get back to a more play-based environment for kids. And so I think talking about kind of the early stages of play and why play is so valuable when even during infancy, you know, I think for us to have an understanding of that can kind of give us a better appreciation for why we need to create more play spaces for kids. So I'll go through a little bit of kind of child development and play, different stages of play, some of the different cognitive skills and other kinds of social emotional skills that kids can learn through different kinds of play. So, you know, even in the very early months of life, children engage in sensory motor play. So they're using their body to explore the world. They're mouthing objects. They're picking up objects. That's a form of play. You know, they're playing with their world, with their environment. And that's also very important work for them at that point. So another point that I'd like us to keep in mind is that play is very much the work of childhood. For kids, work and play are kind of the same thing. You know, their work is their play is their work. My son is 3, and lately he's been saying a lot, if he's trying to play with something that we don't want him playing with, we'll say, no, he can't play with that. And lately he's been saying to us, I'm not playing. You know, he'll say, I wasn't playing with it, because to him it's serious work.
Yeah, he's
Very
using
much.
it.
He's not playing, he's
Very
using
much.
it, exactly. So I try to be mindful of that and sensitive to the fact that for him, this is not just frivolous play. This is actually important work for him. So I can still set the limit on him, but with the understanding that for him, this is not just something so easy that he can give up. Oh, it's just play. You know, for him, it's very important. A little bit later on, still within the first year or so of life, kids start engaging in constructive play, so building things, you know, blocks, Legos. We were talking about Legos earlier. And an interesting thing about Legos that I've been thinking about lately is because a lot of the kids that I work with in practice, you know, they're into Legos. A lot of us were as kids. I was very much into Legos. But today, a lot of the Lego sets seem to be very much geared around particular characters from movies. You know, even Legos have become much more commercial than they used to be.
Correct.
So what I remember from Legos is that they were kind of just generic sets.
A bag of Legos.
A
yeah,
bag of
that's what it-
Legos. It's just
yeah.
a box, different color, sizes Legos. Today, it's Pirates of the Caribbean Legos. It's Star Wars Legos. It's so there's almost a script already. Kids are
Yeah.
buying a set
That's right.
that they know what they're supposed to do with it already. So even with some of these toys that used to be up to the child to kind of decide what to do with them, there's already ideas being imposed on the child about what to do with those toys.
That's right. So we do encourage. We've talked about that before, and we do encourage the parents to have just pieces of Lego in a basket.
Yeah,
If they and then the kids can also create their own scenarios,
Exactly.
anything they want with them.
right. It's
Yeah.
it's so important for children to be able to use their creativity and to decide for themselves how to use objects. So. Pretend play, 18 months, kids begin engaging in pretend play. So, feeding a doll, putting a doll to sleep. So they begin using symbols also. So, a block can become a bottle to feed the baby with. A cloth can be a blanket for the baby, or it can be a napkin, or it can be something else. So they begin using objects in different ways to symbolize different things. Substitute play, well, that's kind of what I just alluded to. So a block can be a car, or it can be something else. Sociodramatic play during the first few years of life begins to develop. So they can begin assigning roles to each other. Someone mentioned playing school, right? Or playing house. These are very common games. I think, generally the ages 3 or 3 to 4, I think kids start doing this a lot more, but even earlier than that. Rule governs play doesn't really come in until, a little bit later on, maybe around 6 or 7, kids start becoming more interested in games that are governed by rules. And before that, it's sometimes developmentally inappropriate for us to expect kids to want to engage and play with games that have strict rules. So, I see I work sometimes with parents who really want their children to be playing board games and following the rules, and I work with a lot of kids also who love to break the rules when playing board games, or just make up their own rules as they go.
Oh yes.
Oh my god.
And
We've
it can,
seen that happening here too.
and it can be,
There's
yeah,
a
exactly.
camera in my house.
It can sometimes be a little frustrating as an adult playing with a child who wants to just be making up the rules as you go, because
Every time
we
he's
have our
losing,
own
he's like,
ideas
"No."
about what the rules are supposed to be, the right way to play. Cheating, kids cheating is sometimes a big problem. But really, until kids are developmentally ready to really be playing in more rule governed games, that's kind of what's appropriate in those early years for them to be making up their own rules, being creative, not being boxed in by.
How old do they
It's just
need
that-
to do that? Because I have trouble with therapy. I used to
6,
do,
7,
play games with the
Yeah.
kids. And if there was more than one child, and even I would get competitive, but if there was more than one child, like the other child, no, you can't do that. That's not.
Right, and that's
So what age do you, kindergartners have a lot of trouble with winning and losing and all that.
right.
But what age do you
They're
think
very
is
competitive
appropriate?
in kindergarten. Yeah.
6, 7, 8. 6, 7, 8 is when it becomes more appropriate to, expect that kids would start following the rules or being more interested in following the rules. And I think if we reflect on the kids we know, that probably makes some sense, like you're saying, at about that age, kindergarten age, kids become more interested in following the rules. It becomes more important to them. So before it's important to them, it can be we can be getting in their way if we just expect too much for them to
And
be.
also winning is important to them.
And winning becomes
At
important.
that age, they get very upset if they don't, at least my
In
experience.
Right.
kindergarteners, yes, I reckon. But one way I think to do it is when whatever age you're doing it is 6 and up, perhaps it's easier to do it. But we do play bingo games here with the kids, with the even with the younger kids, and they love to do any kind of bingo games or puzzles. Matching the words with other words.
Right, yeah.
There is not really a winner. We don't make a big deal
Yeah,
about somebody that
bingo
wins.
is not really a winner.
It's
I
not
usually
about
let it
competition,
go,
but
yeah.
it's playing.
Right.
But one way to, when you introduce the board games that have rules, and then is to set up the expectations, explain the rules in advance. And so even if they want to add a new rule or change a new rule, it has to be done at the beginning. So that's what we are trying to make clear, because otherwise, that part of, making up rules to cheat a little bit,
Right.
it's not something that you want to encourage. So setting up the rules at the beginning, if something they don't understand or they think it has to be changed. But actually the elementary students are making their own games now, board games. So they're very much into making up the rules for the games, according to the curriculum. Actually. this year is about planets, right? No, last year was about planets, and this year is continents
and ecosystems. Yeah.
and ecosystems. So they have to move from one ecosystem to the other one.
Yeah, so at about 6 or 7, logical thinking, starts to develop. Kids have a better grasp on the distinction between fantasy and reality. So they begin kind of understanding classification. So they begin to understand that under the umbrella of fruit are all kinds of things. An apple, a banana, orange, these are all fruits. So they begin to gain a sense of classification. They can begin to generalize from personal experience also. So before that, kids don't really have a full grasp of, well, if in this situation I felt this way, then in a similar situation, Joe might feel similar to the way that I felt, But around 6 or 7, they begin to develop that sense of being able to take another person's perspective. And they can do this to a certain extent before that, but it kind of kicks in more, around that age. But these kinds of skills, these later skills, these later more cognitive skills, and some of the more important social emotional skills like empathy, they really depend on these earlier stages of play, having moved through these earlier stages of play. So one of the biggest issues that I think we're seeing with a lot of our kids today is that because in their very early years, 1 to 3, they're not given as much opportunity for free play. And so they're not developing those foundational skills that then can allow them to develop empathy later on, things like empathy later on. So some of the different kind of intellectual skills that kids learn through play, language is obviously a big one, from very early on. Kids experiment with sounds, babbling and making all kinds of sounds. That's a form of play, and that's, the early precursors to language development. And I think when it comes to helping kids to develop language and to develop all the other kind of intellectual cognitive skills that we want them to have to be ready for school and beyond, it's important that we are able to kind of get playful, that we can be playful about the way we go about teaching these things. So, I used to read as a kid a lot of, or I was read to a lot of Shel Silverstein poems. So things like that, poems that very much are playful with the way words are used. I know with my son, he loves to, and always has loved to, just kind of play with, emphasizing different syllables of words, or switching out the first letter of words and just making up silly, goofy words. So the more we can be playful with this, at home with our kids, the more we engage them in the learning process, the more interested they're going to be.
And that's also good for the phonological skills.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Pre-reading skills and all that.
Exactly. So, getting silly. So, apple, bapple, gapple, zapple. Just switching out one syllable of a word and just playing with that. So, kids also learn cause and effect through play. So, at around the terrible twos, a lot of us call them. Kids begin doing things like dropping their food on the floor, or over and over again dropping the fork on the floor. So
Turning off the lights,
on and off,
All the
right. This is play. They're learning cause and effect. They're learning when I drop the fork, mommy picks it up for me. Maybe that's not something we want them to learn. Maybe we want them to learn that when they drop the fork, it stays there and they're not going to get it back to them. But the point is that they are practicing and they're learning what's going to happen when I do this, So they're gaining a sense of agency, that they have an effect on the world. And they're also gaining a sense of, an early sense, I think, of responsibility, because their actions have certain consequences. So just allowing them, to have these kinds of opportunities to experiment. Problem solving. Kids learn problem solving through play. So the square peg doesn't fit into the round hole, but it fits into the square hole. That's a very, it's a very simple example, but they learn problem solving through play. Later on, as they begin to engage in the more kind of dramatic play, how will the hero defeat the dragon? They have to consider the various ways in which the dragon might be defeated, or the different ways in which they might get their younger sibling to sit down and do the math lesson. If they're doing like school kind of based play. So they have to engage in a lot of problem solving. Planning, what am I going to make with these Legos, or what am I going to build with these blocks, or what am I going to make with this Play-Doh? You know, like we experienced as we opened it up, all that anticipation and the planning that immediately begins going on when you engage with materials that give you an opportunity to be creative. So, social emotional skills, I've already mentioned empathy. So games like Simon Says are good for, you know, helping to build that empathy. So being able to mimic someone else's behavior or mimic someone else's facial expression, things like that.
I think self-esteem also is developed
Yeah,
through play, because when the kids, depends of what kind of play, right? But the play we're talking about, that gives them the opportunity to create something, and they feel helpful, and they feel that they did something with a purpose, you know, that then actually more kids are playing with it, for example. That builds the self-esteem, but for sure.
Mhm.
And then they feel more confident too about themselves and what they can do.
mm-hmm.
And it's their territory, you know.
Yeah.
We let them do free play here, as many people do at home, but not many schools do it, unfortunately. You know, they tend to be, they are guiding the kids into the play. So if they do have the opportunity to have free play, and they can create the whole thing and see what happens, I think that's so powerful. It's
Yeah.
very powerful.
Yes, I think that, you know, I think they've done the research now about self-esteem and how in the past, maybe last 10, 15 years, people were giving, you know, people prizes and accolades for doing nothing. And then the research has shown that in order to feel good about yourself, you need to work hard and achieve something, whatever that is, you know, whether you're 2 or you're 22 or you're 32, you know.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I pulled my kids out of the public school system wasn't because it wasn't a good public school system, but they were smart and they didn't have to work hard to get an A. So I wanted them to learn how to do that. And I think it's the same with a child. If you tell a child at any age, oh, you're terrific for what? Like, what are you terrific for? You know, or you get a trophy just for existing on a team. What's the point, you know? And I think that's going to be changing, hopefully, soon.
Hopefully. We are into no punishments or rewards here. So perhaps more and more people, as we do these workshops, actually, that's the idea too, and more people will be aware of that.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with getting a reward, but if you have to work hard for it.
Right.
You know, if you I mean, at this age, it's a little bit different, but when you get older, I mean, you get a reward if you worked really hard, and then it means something to you. To get what I would call an empty A or an empty accolade.
I think there's also the difference between a reward and like an acknowledgement of hard work too.
Well, yes.
Yeah. So being able to, you know, not recognize necessarily the end result, but recognize all of the effort that someone put in to
into getting that. Yeah, like that book Mindset. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Carol Dweck from Stanford.
To be more process focused.
More process focused.
So when you're home, you know, when we're home with our kids, not necessarily waiting until the tower, the castle is complete, and then say, wow, what a great castle you made. Although you could do that, but along the way, as you notice them continuing to persevere, even though the castle keeps falling over and they can't quite get it to work, wow, you're working really hard. I can tell how important this is to you to build this castle, you know. So commenting on the process and also helping the children to realize and to learn that the process is as important, if not more, than the end result. You know?
Well, but in that sense, I think that in order to be reinforcing the process, if we start acknowledging and giving rewards, then you're taking importance to the process. And I've seen that happening, and it actually happens in our society. People will, not respect the speed limit unless they get a ticket, right? So we always are waiting for a punishment or a reward. And then the problem is that if you don't get the reward, or if you don't get your parent or your teacher to say this is great, you may think that's not really great. And so in that sense, I think it's very important to keep in mind that the process is what matters in any learning experience. And then if there is coming, something, a great job that you get, because you did great during college or whatever, consequence you have for the work you've done, you will see it naturally happening, right? So I think as soon as we focus on that tower is great, we're taking away from the playtime. I've seen that happen, and the kids then expect you to tell them, is this great or not?
Yeah.
And we don't want to be there all the time telling them, because we want them to really build that self-esteem and recognition within themselves.
They'll know
Right.
it's great.
Um,
They'll know it's great.
They know if they can do better or not. They will know
Right.
it inside themselves, right?
And I noticed this, you know, I don't know, maybe some other people have different experiences, but I've noticed this just with my 3-year-old son, which is that I can tell that for him it's much more about the process than it is the end result, because he will,
For kids in general,
he
it
will
is.
after, you know, an hour of trying to build the tower or whatever it is, he'll walk away from it like it's done. And I'm like, don't you want to bask in your glory here a little? No, for him it was about the doing, and once it's done, he's ready to move on to something else. So then to then try to teach him that this end result is really the most important thing would really be undermining the whole process that he went through.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
And then going back to the Legos and how most of the Legos are these sets with an end result.
Yeah.
I find
Right.
that my daughter, she enjoys building the sets and following the instructions, but once these sets are built, then she doesn't play with them anymore.
Right.
But the first Lego set I got her was that just basic box full of random pieces, and then a couple of ideas of what you could build. That she'll play with all the time.
All the time,
Yeah.
every day.
Because she
every
can
day.
reinvent it every
Exactly,
time.
It's
Yeah.
endless.
because she can constantly just do something with
Yeah.
the process, and there's not this. And then of course, like the OCD part of me with the finished sets that she doesn't play with, you know, she'll break off like random pieces to use it for something else, and I'm like, no, that belongs in. I'm so awful, but it's like that belongs to the set.
Never mind.
Oh my god, if you saw my basement, you would die. There's like half sets.
I know.
this
I
and
should
that.
just
It's like
like
it's all over. And I
do
leave
away
it.
with the sets. Who cares? Just put them all in a box.
What do you do though if they're hard on themselves sometimes? Because you know, sometimes I don't say, like you said, I'm not saying anything. Leo's doing whatever he's doing, but he's very hard on himself sometimes if something breaks or something falls, and I don't really feel. We're not a rewards-based household, you know.
A lot
And
of
also
kids are
praise
like
them. They have done research on praise them and how actually the impact is negative on kids. The
Yeah.
kids are praised, you know. They perform. They have a poor performance compared to the other kids that are not being praised, you know.
Yeah.
But what do you do when they're hard on themselves too? Because I want to say, you know, you don't need to be so hard on yourself. It's not if he's not doing something perfectly, or if he's building something and it breaks, he gets very frustrated. And I mean, I'll say, like you said a long time ago, if he says, "How is
Patience,
this?"
yeah.
and I'm like, "Oh, well, what do you like best about it?" or you know, whatever. You know, I don't do
Well,
that.
I found that
But
with
he's very hard on himself.
some of my special ed kids were very hard on themselves because they knew they struggled to do something they couldn't do, and they could see other kids doing it, and they would just shut down. So I'm not quite sure, this is how I handled it, but I'm not sure if it was the right way. I would just say, you know, you can't tell me you can't do it, we have to try, and I will help you. I will help you, but you need to try.
Mm-hmm.
So, but kids do know, they make their own comparisons. They see what other people do, they see what other kids can or can't do, they see what they can or can't do, and they do, at least in my experience, do get upset when they feel like they're falling short compared to their peers. Not that anybody's even saying anything, they see it.
Mm-hmm.
And any teacher will tell you, and any child will tell you, you don't have to tell anybody who the smart kids in the class are. Day one, they know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I let you respond if you want, but there are two different cases here. Some kids with special needs that get frustrated because they really cannot do it,
Right.
and some kids that have special needs too, in the sense that they're gifted for so many things that when they have something that they cannot do right away, they get frustrated
Yes,
too.
right.
So the
That's true.
frustration there and the lack of patience, I think, with themselves, it is related to nowadays also how things are very fast and the kids don't have to wait for anything and they don't have to be persevering
Right.
for certain things.
Right.
So I would encourage to persevere in those cases. You
Right,
know, I
and-
don't know
and-
what you suggest, Jason, but it's
Right, and you do, and I think that's the thing, is that they don't want to take the time, and again, I worked with mostly special ed kids, they don't want to take the time, because a lot of times the teachers, in an effort to help, will do scaffolding, meaning that they help them so much to get
So
to the
much.
answer,
Yeah.
that they are so used to that.
To
They're
have
so
all
used
the
to all that help so that they feel good about themselves.
Mhm.
But in the end, then they don't know how to go through the process.
And then I want to also add on to that, like today, with everything being so instantaneous,
Right.
we're an
So much.
instant
Right.
gratification kind
Yes.
of society now, and
Right.
of course that's going to trickle down to
Right.
our kids, and
Right.
you know, think that, oh, I just want something, I can have it right now.
Right
'Cause
now,
every,
or do it right
yeah.
now. Mm-hmm.
And even my daughter, she was admiring a drawing that a grown-up did, and she's like, wow, that's so great, I can't believe somebody drew that. And I said, you know, when that person first started drawing, they couldn't draw like that.
Mhm.
It took lots and lots of practice, lots of time, lots of patience, lots of practice.
Yes.
And I try to keep saying we're practice and patience when she gets upset that she can't do something right away. Like last night, she was making a prop for the play, and she had her scissors and she was cutting felt, and she's like, Mommy, these scissors won't cut the felt. And I tried it, and I'm like, no, they do fine. She's like, well, it's really hard. And I said, well, you have to figure out how to do it, how to make it work, and it's gonna feel hard, but you have to just keep going. If you
Keep
want to
trying.
you pick
Yeah.
this project, this is what you wanted to do, you need to figure out how to make it work. And she did eventually get it done. I just constant reminders, I guess.
This is a topic we'll come back to a lot during the Positive Discipline series. We're doing 4 of those sessions later in the year, so we'll come back to this, you know.
March, right?
Yeah, the idea of using praise and focusing, praise versus non-praise, you know, focusing on process. Yeah, I think we're gonna be spending a lot more time talking about those things then. I'd like to, I guess I'm gonna be skipping ahead a little bit now for the sake of time, and also for the sake of people who are, you know, online, who can't really participate as much in the conversation. I just wanna make sure we hit a few other topics. One thing is structured versus free play. So I'm gonna spend a few minutes kind of comparing, you know, the value of each of those, because they each have benefits, you know, and limitations. Some of the benefits of more structured play, things like athletics and board games and card games, those kind of things that have kind of a script, you know, about them, are that they do provide children with a sense of structure, you know, and for some kids, and every kid is different, and as we're talking about this, we need to keep that in mind, that every kid's needs is slightly different. So for some kids need more structure to feel safe, secure, and to develop skills of self-regulation. You know, some kids require more structure to do those things than others. So for those kids, you know, structured play activities might be really helpful, really valuable. Teaching compliance with rules too, you know, for kids who maybe have trouble kind of following the rules, engaging in games and activities that have, you know, strict rules, you know, might be helpful for them also. Structured activities, especially things like athletics, you know, playing for a team, playing for a coach, teaches respect for, you know, respect for each other, respect for authority, respect for adults. They can teach discipline also, so structured activities like martial arts specifically, you know, comes to mind, you know, when it comes to, you know, learning discipline. And also these things can provide a competitive outlet for kids. You know, some kids need that competitive outlet. Some kids are very competitive. Other kids shy away from competition. But for the kids who do seem to need that competitive outlet, structured activities like sports can provide that. One of the issues, kind of on a side note, one of the issues that I see happening a lot today is that all kids are kind of being funneled into these competitive kinds of activities, regardless of whether or not they have competitive kind of inclinations, you know, so all kids are expected to play a sport of some kinds. You know, there are a lot of kids that are you know, playing soccer, for instance, who have no interest in playing soccer, or playing baseball, who have no interest in playing baseball. They'd rather be home drawing or something. So for better or worse, these more structured activities, especially sports, have become kind of the norm, you know, that everybody's expected to take part in. Some of the limitations of these structured activities are that too much too early on can stifle imagination and a more creative kind of free play, you know, that we've already talked about being so valuable for kids. So, you know, kids today are kind of pushed into athletics at a very early age now, you know, earlier than it's often developmentally appropriate, you know. Controls, like Laura was alluding to with the speeding tickets, controls on behavior are externally imposed, you know, on kids, you know, during these more structured activities, during sports. So there's always an adult there, there's always someone older there telling them what they should and shouldn't be doing and providing the limits for them. So there's not as much opportunity for children to develop self-control and to learn to regulate themselves because they don't need to. There's always someone there to do it for them. And also interpersonal exchanges, the whole social kind of atmosphere, during athletics, for instance, is kind of dictated also. So rather than happening spontaneously, there's a set of rules with which we engage. This is my role. If we're playing football, I'm the one who throws the ball, you're the one who catches the ball. I'm the one who runs the ball, you're the one who blocks, so everybody has their role that's kind of scripted for them. Rather than those social exchanges happening spontaneously, rather than kids having a conflict of some kind and figuring out how to manage that on their own. There's less opportunity for that because the roles are so scripted. And so in contrast, free play, allows for more imagination, more creativity, obviously, more spontaneous interactions to occur. And again, I think so essential is the development of self-control, self-regulation, as opposed to being controlled by external, sources. Let's talk a little bit about nature play too, because, like we alluded to earlier, kids are not getting outside as much as they used to. And nature play is so important for a lot of different reasons. Research shows that being out in nature reduces stress and anxiety, helps people, be less depressed also. I mean, a lot of these things may seem fairly obvious because they are. Getting outside is good for us. Breathing the fresh air, being out in nature. Another important thing about being out in nature is that the landscape itself can become the play material for kids. And in very much the same way that a generic set of Legos can be used over and over again for many different purposes, nature can be used in the same way. So today, my son may go outside and he may decide that the mountain is an underground, hobbit hole, or something. There's something living under there. The next day he goes outside, that mountain may be something else. So each day, you can use what nature provides to suit whatever the needs are in the moment, and to get creative with how you use it.
One year we had the students digging a hole here in the playground, thinking they were gonna get to China. Remember?
Oh yeah.
They created the script for the play, and that was, one of the ideas, going to China.
When Liam was toilet training, when he was potty training, I was outside with him, and we came across on our property a hollowed out tree stump. And so for him that day, the tree stump was a potty. But for another kid of another developmental stage, that hollowed out tree stump might have been a cauldron. There might have been a witch living nearby who was using it as a cauldron, or it might have been something else. So each kid can kind of use nature for their own purposes, which I think is a really valuable thing about it. Nature also stimulates the senses in a very direct way, So when we go outside, there are smells and there are textures and there are lots of things to see and hear. So it really stimulates the senses in a way that, in a more soothing, kind of biologically appropriate way than video games do. Video games can also be very stimulating, but in an overstimulating kind of way. So nature can provide a lot of what kids right now are getting through video games, but in a way that biologically kind of works better for us, because that's what was intended. We were intended to be experiencing nature with all of our senses.
I want to make a comment because we, in the past, we had this workshop was called Importance of Play. And one of the exercises I like to do at the beginning of the workshop with the parents, maybe you've been in one of them, Laura, was to give them cards to write down what experience they remember from childhood about playtime. I would say 95% of the things that people wrote were related to nature. Mm-hmm. And I thought, to me it was an experiment, right? And I think it is related that you use all of your senses when you are playing in nature. Mm-hmm. So then you remember the smell, you remember the touch, you remember, I still have images in my mind. And people were talking about either the woods or playing at the beach or playing, with something, most of the experiences they remember the most were the ones in nature.
Yeah.
So they stay with you forever. I think.
Right. You know, being out in nature, I know for me also allows me to feel a sense of connection, you know, with the world, with the universe, with our ecology. And so this can really be an antidote for feelings of isolation and loneliness, which I think is something that is very commonly a lot of us experience in today's kind of culture. It's very easy to feel isolated. We talked, someone mentioned this earlier about being more isolated today. You know, so nature can be an antidote to those kind of feelings. Howard Gardner also just talked about, some of you probably know about Howard Gardner's work. He talked about the 7 kinds of intelligence. A little bit later on, he added an 8th kind, which was nature intelligence. Some kids just have a natural, naturally inclined to be in nature. So he considered that to be a kind of intelligence, actually.
Give Ray a shout out.
Yeah, I know.
So,
Well, I didn't think it was, but now I know.
so if you consider the fact that kids aren't getting outside, there's probably a good chunk of kids who are really missing out on developing what their strength is in terms of their learning style, you know. So.
Oh, in fact, I'm insecure that he's really too much into nature and not into any other games.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry too much
Like he's
about
not
it.
really into
That's
sports
awesome.
at all, and he's like, no, I don't want to play soccer, I don't want to play basketball, I just want to do my gardening.
You
Yeah,
have to
that's
feel like he has
awesome.
to do that.
Right.
You know, those sports,
I
which
feel-
I know there's a pressure for that.
Exactly,
You know, I have to go
because
through that
everybody
too.
around me is doing that, and here is my kid who just doesn't want to do it, and I don't know how
That's
to make
okay,
him do
yeah,
it.
no,
He
that's
wants to.
awesome.
He created an incubator for eggs, so for chickens. I mean, he does all kinds of things in nature, and that's fantastic. You know,
And he does
he's
get
not-
physical activities outside. He's
No,
working
he
hard.
just this weekend he created his own bamboo planter. So
Yeah, that's great.
all the time. He's
Yeah,
creating
he's
stuff
all the
related
time.
Yeah,
to
so
nature.
no, but I just feel I'm just insecure because he's 8 years old and he's really not playing anything except.
But what
this.
you don't know, he said that he has a human costume, and underneath there's chicken skin.
yeah.
All he wants to do is farming and gardening.
But that's physical.
And there's
Yeah.
also, and you know, the environmental,
Right?
even the Environmental Education Center in Basking Ridge, like to just get lost there is so fun. I used to take Leah there all the time when she was little.
It's easy though to become kind of insecure when we begin comparing to what most other people
Yeah.
are doing, you know.
All
But-
of them, in fact, like everybody around me is.
But this is when you remind yourself this is a new phenomenon that kids aren't being outside in nature. A few decades ago,
That's
it
right.
was very much the opposite. So a few decades ago, he would have been very much in the norm, you know.
That's right. He would have
So-
been playing with Francisco.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, Leo gets cranky if he's not outside.
They need
Oh,
to.
He's
yeah.
used to going
Yeah.
outside, right? I mean, they're just used to it. Unless it's like really pouring or something really bad, I try to get him out, right? I
No,
mean,
but he's
because
doing
they,
composting, he's doing everything.
but that's awesome.
And they still climb
Except-
trees, right? We have some kids that climb trees.
Yeah.
still.
Oh yeah, of course
Yeah.
he's climbing.
They
trees.
talk about that. Yeah.
Got yelled at because there's no trees to climb on my property. I'm like, I'm sorry.
Oh, we were taking a
They can
walk
only
around the
climb in the
neighborhood
park,
and
there's
he
no
was
trees.
actually trying to get into other people's yard because
Yeah.
they had these trees and I'm like, no, you are not doing that, buddy.
Oh yeah.
Monkeys do, he was like.
It's
They
not
don't ask
allowed
for
in
permission.
Summit. There are cameras all over and I'm like, no, you
No,
can't just
yeah.
get in their backyard.
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
Yeah, the idea of there being cameras.
Oh, gosh.
It's kind of
You
nuts.
can't even, yeah.
There's cameras in schools.
Yeah. One of the main things that a lot of people who end up in my office with their kids, one of the main things that comes up is kids having difficulty with transitioning and adjusting. You know, moving from one thing to another or one environment to another. You know, those kind of transitions and adjustments. And I think getting out into nature could really help with a lot of that. You know, because when you're out in nature, you see nature transitioning. You know, you see the nature waking up in the morning. You see nature going to sleep in the evening. You see these natural transitions that happen between seasons. You know, from fall to winter, from winter to spring, from spring to summer. And so, being out in nature gives you a sense of that sense of that process, you know.
Or a bird building a nest. You know?
Yeah,
A
yeah.
little pond getting dry and then getting
Right.
the water again, and then when it's dry, you find the turtles there or anything. I mean,
Right.
so many things happen in nature.
Right,
and
right. Watching the behavior of animals across the seasons.
all the time.
So watching
yeah.
what the squirrels do just before the winter comes, and then watching what they do when spring rolls around again, you know.
So many.
Those kind of things, right, right.
So I think that what needs to happen in schools then, because this is not happening, kids are not out in nature much, is that there needs to be, the schools I think need to promote more parent training, because there's not a lot of parent training, and in many communities, every community I think there's more, there are more people who are not American and have come from different cultures, and you know, they really don't, they feed their kids and they clothe their kids and they love their kids, but they just don't know about much else about how to educate them or to encourage their intellect or their social skills or their emotional skills. And many times, you know, we call Division of Family Services because things that they think are fine are not just with play, but with many other things. And so there needs to be more education in the
For
schools,
parents,
for
for sure.
parents.
Yeah, I agree.
And
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that, I guess.
We're doing it here.
Yes,
Yeah.
but this is a very
We have
small,
a list of workshops.
very small scale. Yeah, I mean, it needs to be more of an outreach in large public school systems to get people in to encourage, you know, how to even speak to your children.
Yeah.
And how to have them play, how to have them engage with the world beyond. I'm not saying you should take away everything that you know, we have in terms of the internet and resources, because it's a big resource out there to be able to use the computer. But there are other things that need to be done in moderation, and other things that need to be done in place of that.
Yeah.
But you know, it's very hard to do that.
Yeah, I agree. We need to be talking more about how to do those things. Yeah, we just need, I think it starts with parents just getting together, even in small groups like this, and then maybe, you know, expanding, but really just getting together with parents and talking about what do we want for our kids, you know? How do we get that message across to the people who are in charge of our kids, you know?
We've been doing this for 16 years, and I can see families, you know, different kinds of workshops. I can see families nowadays that have their kids, you know, are older, and how important these workshops were for them, because they can reassure, you know, if they are concerned because the kids don't play sports, for example, they can say, okay, my child is healthy, you know, he wants to play in nature, things like that will guide the parents. And even small scale, and I only believe in small scale, unfortunately. I don't believe in large scale, because I try to do these workshops where my kids went to public school, and there was no room for it.
Yeah.
There was no room for the kids to have recess. So for a school to believe that this is important, they have to understand, first of all, that there are many things that they have to change. As for example, giving the kids time to play. They delete the playtime as soon as 4th grade.
Oh, really?
They don't have recess in the schools around here. 4th, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade.
Okay.
There's no social time.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
There's no
We have
social
it.
time.
We don't
And
have
I
much,
even
but
tried
we
to
do.
convince the principal to say, okay, there's no room in the schedule for, you know, the busy schedule they have, this blue ribbon schools, right? Very busy, very tight schedule. Why don't you have them come 15 minutes earlier? I said, I don't think the parents would like that, to bring the kids 15 minutes earlier, but I said, they have to talk. You know, these kids are 12, 13, 14. They need to talk to their peers, and if they are being reprimanded in class
Right.
time on the buses, because, you know, the driver, of course, has to drive and has to be focused, then there is no room. So it's very, very hard to change, I think, the big systems. It's
Right,
very
but I
hard.
think they can still have parent education programs in the end of, you know, at night or at the end of the day. The parents can be educated. And I mean, I understand what you're saying about no room in the day for that, but most schools, I'm surprised to hear that. I mean, I was on the Board of Education in Somerset Hills for a while. My kids went through the 8th grade there, and they did have outdoor activities at that time. Maybe that's changed.
Through 8th grade they had?
Yeah, maybe that's changed.
They removed the recess.
Maybe because the curriculum has, keep adding
They
and adding.
add,
And,
yes.
yeah.
Summit
And they-
schools, even the elementary one in Summit has I think 30 or 40 minutes of recess, which includes your lunchtime and you play outside. So
Yeah.
kids who can just like gobble
Yeah,
up
yeah.
their lunch get time to play outside, and who cannot
But up to
either
what grade?
skip lunch or
Up to what grade? In 5th
This-
grade,
no,
I
this
think
is
most of the
elementary
schools.
school I'm talking about.
Elementary.
So-
I don't know about the middle
No,
school.
middle schools.
Okay, they only have 15 minutes?
No, the total recess time is I think about 40 minutes, but that includes your outdoor play and your
Oh, okay,
lunch.
okay,
So
yes.
I mean, kids who are slow eaters, what do they do?
Right, well,
or-
yeah, you can't
Or
accommodate
then you just
everything.
land up skipping lunch because you want to play with your peers
Yeah,
outside,
yeah.
and you just want to be outside.
Well, I will say that, the demands that are made, by the state on the curriculum are nothing, you can't get away from that,
Yeah.
so,
That's I think the whole beginning of the whole thing.
I mean, you
Yeah.
just can't, so you have to do that, and you're accountable
Maybe
for many things.
one of the solutions would be to educate, or not educate, but tell the children and reinforce the idea in the children too that what they're doing, their playtime is important. I think we do a really great job here of reminding the kids to take that time to reflect and to take time to play and to really do their best in everything that they're working on, and creating space in the classroom for engaged play as well.
But what grade does this go up to?
We're till 8th.
And we're expanding in Mendham next year.
Yeah.
So we are going to do some workshops in Mendham too, in that area.
I think that there's a way, it doesn't have to be a formal, acknowledgement of your play is important to the kids necessarily, but to make them feel the ideal would be everywhere that they feel that their playtime is justified, but at least starting from somewhere small, in some way or another, giving them the justification that their play is, that we know that their play is important to them, and that's something that they could carry through.
It's funny because it was 2 years ago, I think, that Leah was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and she wanted to stay that extra hour, remember? She wanted to stay till 1:30 instead of 12:30 or something like that. So I let her stay, I think, for the spring semester, and I remember my mother-in-law saying to me, well, what is she doing for that extra hour? I'm like, oh, she's playing.
I'm
she's
playing with
like,
other kids.
Oh, she's not getting like some sort of instruction or, and I'm like, no.
She's learning a lot.
Play
While
is
playing.
really important. But it's just funny, there's this, that
Well, the idea
was
that
little,
piles of homework will
Actually,
make a
yeah.
better
Yeah.
student, that's
Yeah.
not true. And
Leo
also,
loves
giving
Mondays
them
and
less
Tuesdays.
homework will allow
He
them
does,
to
he
have more
knows.
playtime too at home, which is something that schools take over the home time, which is home time, it's
Right.
not school time. And so, being conscious of that too, that piles of homework really don't make better students, for sure.
Right.
They burn them out,
Right.
that's for sure.
and actually even here, like if she has homework to do, but she's in her area playing, I just let her go. She knows that she can come and do
How old
homework
is
in the
she?
morning. She's 6, she's in first
Okay,
grade.
well, that's different. Has
No,
to
but
cha-
my-
it
even my
changes when they get a
8-year-old.
little older.
Well, I'll tell you,
Well-
I'm going to give you you should be proud of yourself thing. Because Leo loves Mondays and Tuesdays. Because he knows he has that extra playtime. So he knows it.
Mhm.
And he's thankful for it.
Mhm.
And he's in 4th grade.
Yeah.
And he's happy about that. So,
Yeah, even my 8-year-old, he's like, if he doesn't want to do the homework, thankfully we are in a school that lets him not do it at home, and then he can come here and do it.
They still have to do it, so
Yeah,
they
we
have
have
the
to do it, but
responsibility.
it's just that there's
They
the
have to do it.
flexibility.
They are
the
responsible. So
and the
we,
consequence here is if she does it in the
Yeah.
morning, I didn't realize this, they don't do circle time.
it depends. If they finish it, if they come on time, they have 45 minutes to review their homework. Since we're talking about this, I'm going to explain it. We give them a little bit of homework. As they grow, we give them maybe more cards, right? Because they can do it faster, basically. And so then they have to do it all by themselves. We do workshops with the parents to explain to them that the purpose of homework here is for us to understand if they can do it, the exercises on their own, or if they need reinforcement in the school. And also to develop some kind of responsibility, right? So they have to do it at home and remember to bring the portfolio back, which that's a whole different thing. And so that's the whole idea. If the parents are there to tell them, you have to do this, you have to do this, they will never remember and take responsibility for it. So it's something that it takes a while, but finally, right, the parents understand.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But then finally
It
it
just
happens.
clicked for me. Last year?
It clicked,
I had me
yes.
with louder. He's not doing the homework. She goes, let it go. We'll take care of it. Don't
Because
say
they're
anything.
8, 9, 10 years old, and even if they're 11, 12, you know, you have all kinds of responsibilities. Like if you don't learn to do it on your own when you're young, then it's gonna be more difficult. You're gonna need your parents in high school reminding you. And I saw friends of my kids with parents on top of them. I never knew if my kids had a test or homework, but some parents were on top of them. Actually, they could access online to see what homework. So the purpose of homework here is that, and also not to give them a lot, so they have that playtime at home or whatever they want to do with the families. Because I don't believe it should be take the rest of the day at home. It's not healthy.
Oh yeah,
you know?
this is that these kids are young. I'm just saying when you get into high school, it gets a little bit different.
Well, we had kids here graduating, right? They finished 6th grade. Now we have kids doing 4th and 5th grade. And I mean, in other schools, they already are giving them piles of homework that take all the time at home. And that's really not, there is a lot of research showing that is not going to make a student to be a better student anyway.
Yeah, and actually you see that, you see the opposite. I
The
mean,
opposite.
my sister went to, one of the top-rated private schools in this area, and really, really struggled because she felt like she couldn't. She's a perfectionist. She couldn't get all of their homework done perfectly every night, and she became so depressed that we couldn't get her out of bed in the morning. And the school's response, instead of just saying, okay, we're going to give you less homework, was, okay, well then we're going to take away your athletics. And you're going to have to spend that time doing your homework. And that was really the only area where she felt confident, because her confidence had just been completely, stripped from her because she felt like she couldn't get the work done. And finally my mom went in, she's like, I'm not going to hear that you're taking away my daughter's time to socialize with her peers and to do something that she really loves, because she can't get the homework done, and the homework is the least important part. And she had to really fight for that. But I mean, my sister was lucky that my mom knew that was the right thing to do, because so many people are not, like, they just automatically trust what the school is doing and assume that it's the right thing, when in reality, maybe for her specifically, that wasn't the right thing, because it wasn't a natural consequence. She just felt like she was being punished.
It was a punishment. It's not related. When it's not related to what they are supposed to do, it is a punishment. So that's why I made it clear that if they don't come without the homework here, they have 45 minutes if they come on time to do it here. And many times, if they didn't do it, it's maybe they didn't feel comfortable doing it by their own. Yes, or they were tired or something else. They had something else going on.
Yeah,
so then they do it here, and they do go to the circle time if they finish the
Right, as long
homework
as they do it.
before.
As long as they do it. And,
They do it. They can. They cannot get.
Yeah, and my kids at Pingree was run more like a college. They had a lot of free time during the day, and they did their work when they could. They did it whenever they could do it at night. They could do it during the day. They had a lot of free time, but it had to be done.
It had to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the same here. Yeah, so they need to do it.
Just took me a while to realize that I don't have to help him, because my natural instinct was like, oh no, this sum you can do it the easier way like this, and I'm like, no, I'm holding myself back. I'm like, just do it the way you've been taught or the way you want to do it.
Leah knows what she has to do.
And of course, with speech therapy, they need to do homework because they need to practice. And if they don't practice, they don't make any progress. So.
Especially with math.
Yeah.
Like, you're doing it this slowly. What is wrong with you?
Leo, one time with the long division problem, I don't know what it was. I was just never good at it, and he got really frustrated. He never asked me to help him. He's like, can you just show me this? I'm like, okay. Let me see what I go. I can't help you. I don't know how to do it. I'm so mad. I forgot. You're going to have to wait till tomorrow. Like, what do you mean you don't know how to do it? I forgot. I don't know. So, they very rarely ask for help because they
Yes,
know they
and
can
if
come
they
in
ask for help, of
and
course,
go
you're
over
there,
it with
right?
you, right?
And if they ask for help, that's one thing. The
And
other
we
thing
don't
is
do it
that
for
thinking
them,
that
but-
we have to help them, because then we're actually we make them feel helpless. I think, right?
No, but
When
I
we do
actually
everything
refrained
for them.
from helping
Yeah.
him because I had like I wanted
She's
to
like a
tell him.
math genius.
No,
so she
I'm
wants
not a
to jump
math
in.
genius. I just want to tell him like the easier way, which I'm like, okay, maybe you're not supposed to do it this way. Like just.
Just want to acknowledge for the people watching online that this group discussion is great for us here, but I realize while we're having the group discussion, the people online are basically just staring at me. Sitting here in this chair.
Yeah.
So I just-
Oh my God,
No, that's okay. It's all right. I just
recorded.
felt the need to at least acknowledge that, for them.
Do you have questions? No.
Yeah, and okay. So we're probably coming close to the end of our time. I wanted to share some thoughts on the way play can be therapeutic for our kids. I use play in my practice and working with kids clinically. I use a lot of play therapy, and so, for kids who need some help resolving issues or problems that are going on, play can be used therapeutically, but also just in everyday life for all of our kids, regardless of whether or not they have a specific, problem. Play can also have very much a therapeutic value for them as well. And I'll be using some personal examples, to illustrate some of these. So, with anxiety, for a child experiencing anxiety, play can be very therapeutic. So, some examples of this are Liam, as you guys here at the school know, he's very much into vacuums, And I think his interest in vacuums started because it was at a time when he was, a couple years ago when he was very young. And there had been a couple of things recently go on which were very loud. So he was suddenly being exposed to some loud things. So his grandpa has a motorcycle, and he for the first time was kind of shown the motorcycle and heard it being turned on and all that. And so for him it was both exciting but also a little scary. This motorcycle was very loud. Also at the time he was a little bit scared of the sound of the vacuum. Turning the vacuum on, and he'd be timid around it, So these loud sounds. So I think that one of the ways he coped with that, and he dealt with the anxiety around this issue of loud noises, was he kind of adopted the vacuum as his kind of personal, the place where he was going to kind of master this worry or this anxiety, right? So rather than be afraid of the noise of the vacuum, he was going to be the one to control the vacuum. So from there he knows more about vacuums than most people I know, probably anyone I know. He really does.
He did a whole special class on that.
Oh,
Yeah,
he
he did a
did.
special
He
class
did.
on
He
that.
brought the vacuum.
So-
I love it.
So
My house.
So he learns how to plug and unplug the vacuum, turn on and off the vacuum. He learned how to take the vacuum apart, put it back together using the vacuum. He's very much into vacuums, and I think that whole interest of his was around mastering this anxiety, frustration. Another good example of mastering anxiety, and anxiety is common for young children. All young children experience anxieties. We often just think of anxiety in terms of being pathological or something bad, but it's a very normal part of childhood. Actually, it's a very normal part of growing up. And at different stages, kids experience very normal anxiety about different issues, as they come up at different developmental stages. And so, another, example of kind of mastering anxiety would be, building tunnels in the house and pretending there's a dragon in the tunnel, and then taking a sword or something and going to the tunnel to defeat the dragon or something. These are things kids do to kind of cope with worries, fears, anxieties, normal kind of childhood anxieties, to kind of master those feelings. Frustration, especially frustration within interpersonal experiences. So, for instance, there was a time that I was setting a limit on Liam. He wanted something in a drawer. I wasn't going to let him have it. He was getting upset. I was getting frustrated. It was a standoff between us, basically, about this, where I was not going to give in, and he wasn't really going to give in that easily either. Eventually I stood my grounds. He ended up, giving up on getting what it was he wanted. He knew he wasn't going to get it. So he walked away with the frustration of that. And he had been he had been in probably one of his rare kind of very tantrumy moments about this. eventually he moved on, he went away. And then from the other room, I heard him with with a doll, you know, kind of reprimanding the doll about, don't do that again, or something he was saying to the doll. So he was kind of reinterpreting in his own way the interaction that had just happened between him and I. So that frustration that he walked away with, specifically, like I said, that interpersonal kind of frustration, you know, the frustration that existed within his relationship with me, he played with that, you know, in the other room with his doll. He kind of reenacted that a bit as his way of kind of coping with that. Also, you know, in my office, sometimes with kids, we'll use puppets. You know, if something happened at school, you know, Billy hit Joey at school, so Billy comes in and we'll use the puppets to
How
kind
old
of
are the
reenact
kids?
what happened. This kid that I have in mind is 6 years old. Yeah,
So if they're older, would you use puppets with them?
Older kids might use something, you know, might use something else, or there might be more talking involved, you know. But with especially kids below that set, like we talked about, that 7, 8-year-old threshold, you know, it's sometimes very valuable and therapeutic to just keep it within the context of play, rather than sit down and talk through the details of what happened at school. Using the puppets can allow the child to, you know, relax, not be so defensive, because now it's between the puppets. Now it's a little bit removed. It's not so much about what I did at school, but now it's about what this puppet is doing at school, and how can we kind of problem solve and play this out and see how we might resolve this, you know, differently. Trauma, you know, play is really, really therapeutic for kids who have experienced trauma. So Liam, you know, a handful of months ago, he ended up in the hospital because he had poked a hole through his soft palate in his mouth, and it was, yeah, traumatic moment for all of us, you know. And afterwards, you know, not unexpectedly, doctor play became important for him. You know, in the weeks following that event, you know, he was pulling out the doctor's kit, and he was taking care of me and taking care of mommy, and we were taking care of him, and he was taking care of the dolls. And so all of that allowed him to kind of process the experience, you know, in a way that a 2.5-year-old wouldn't have been able to talk through it so much, but he was able to play through it, and really, I think, seems to me, at least at this point, really come to terms with what happens, you know. Also, you know, something I sometimes do with him is to, if he fall, this doesn't happen so much anymore, but when he was younger, if he would fall or get hurt or whatever, using a doll to kind of show him what happens, you know, to kind of make sense of it. You know, these things can be these small traumas can be very confusing for kids because they don't have the words to express them. Sometimes, you know, it sometimes seems to happen quickly. They could be playing with something one moment, and the next moment they find themselves on the floor with a bump on their head, you know, so these
But
can
that's
be
what
very...
happened to Liam, right?
Yeah,
Playing.
exactly. These can be very confusing moments for kids, and so helping them to understand by using a doll or a puppet to show them, oh, this is what happened, you know, so keeping it within the play, you know. Also dealing with anger and aggression. I mean, all kids have aggressive impulses at times, and that's not a bad thing. It can become, you know, a bad thing sometimes, but aggression itself is not a bad thing. All kids have some amount of aggression, and all of us experience anger at times. And so a great way for kids to kind of integrate those feelings and come to terms with those feelings and express them positively is through play. That's one of the most common issues that kids in my office, you know, at the practice come in with is, you know, anger issues, difficulty controlling their aggressive feelings. But within the context of play, they can contain those feelings, they can express them in a safe way, and often the experience of doing that repeatedly over and over again leads to a decrease in the intensity of those feelings. So
Going back to the shootings, you know, everywhere, that's something that, you know, these people probably never got to work out.
yeah, exactly.
The anger, because otherwise, you know, you had to have a lot of anger to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
And how do you teach kids to deal with anger issues coming from the other side? Like, example, a friend is showing aggressive behavior. How do you?
Oh, from the other side, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like, how do you?
I think depending on the age of the child, it would be different. I guess right now I'm thinking of, you know, a kid that comes to my mind at about 6, and for
More like older kids. Like I'm speaking specifically about my son. Like
Right.
he doesn't know how to deal with aggression which is coming from the other side, and he's like always trying to ask me, oh mommy, this happened, what do I do?
Right.
And he asks me if I went through a similar situation when I was in school, and he was like, oh, did that happen to you? Did that happen to you? What did you do? What did you do? Like, how are you supposed to react
Right.
in those situations
Yeah.
where you don't have the aggressive streak, but then yet it's like
Yeah, I mean, as kids get older, you can talk to them more directly, and I think it's very valuable to share your experiences, with them, if you've ever been on either side of it, to share with them. And even if your experience doesn't match up completely with them, I think it's more about them feeling a sense of connection and support from you as they're talking about these things, So if you're attempting to connect with them by sharing, that has value, I also think this is reminding me of something that we weren't really going to have much time to talk about, but now I'll bring it in, which is kind of rough and tumble play. And I think even for kids as they get older, having an opportunity with someone who is safe and trustworthy, a caregiver, a parent, to engage in rough and tumble play is a very important outlet. For kids on both sides of that equation that you're talking about, for the kid who has that aggression they need to burn off and also needs to learn where the limits are and where the boundaries are, it's safe to learn that. It's safe for a boy to learn that in the context of rough and tumble play with his father, for instance. To be wrestling around and that kind of stuff and getting rough. And then learning where the boundary is. Learning, okay, now I've just crossed the line. Now I've just gone a little too far. Next time I need to pull back a bit. Where else are they going to, if not given the opportunity to engage in that, where else are they going to learn where the boundaries are, right?
So that's why my two boys did that till they were like 18, and I wanted to.
Yeah, there you go. It was important for them.
Nisha and his brother, oh my god.
And also, though, for the child on the other side of it, the child who feels kind of the victim of too much aggression, also, engaging in that rough and tumble play gives them the opportunity, again, with someone safe, to say, oh, that's too much. To practice the assertiveness, the assertive side of it, and practice how to set their own limits and set their own boundaries. So that's just one thought that I had in response to your question.
And using words, I don't like what you're doing, or I don't like what you did to me.
Yeah.
Just expressing that. Because I think in
because
that
I'm
sense,
constantly teaching him that just because someone did to you, you don't do it back. Like, just don't do it. Just don't do it. And he's like, why?
Yeah, how do you feel about
Hard,
that?
especially with boys.
How do you, I
Yeah.
want to know how he feels about that. How would, like, if somebody is going to be aggressive towards you, like, how do you handle that?
That's a tough one. I mean, like, that's one of I think the tougher questions for adults to answer is, like, how do you help a child who is either being bullied, is kind of what you're alluding to, or, or has been aggressed against in some way, and I don't really think there's any one cut and dry answer. I think it really depends on that child, I think for some kids, so I don't think it's a matter of just saying, well, you got hit, you need to go back and stand up for yourself and hit the other kid back, show them you're not going to take it. I don't think it's as simple as that. I also don't think it's as simple as, well, hitting is never okay, to do that. Take the high road always, and I don't think
explain that to an 8-year-old.
I don't think it's as simple.
That's what I say.
I don't think it's as simple as that either. I think for some kids one way may be more appropriate, for other kids another way may be more appropriate, and there's a whole bunch of options I think in between also.
But probably the measure is that if they can understand that it's okay not to like something, if they can feel, okay, what the child did to me, it's important that they're aware that it's not acceptable, that it's not and that is aggression.
Right.
Sometimes the victim doesn't realize, okay, that they were bullying him or her until they get to the point that we're actually going to do a whole workshop on bullying, right?
Yeah.
We're going to do a whole workshop in
Please do it in
February,
the mornings.
maybe
Sure.
January or February in Mendham, bullying and technology.
One thing I am thinking is that I think it's really important and empowering for kids that we engage them in a conversation in which they can come up with their own ideas and their own solutions to these problems. So rather than take on the full responsibility as the adult to tell them, this is what you should do, elicit their thoughts and their feelings first, and engage, see what they come up with on their own. the fact that they know they're engaging with a supportive adult, someone who's willing to kind of be in this difficulty with them, who's not going to look to quick fix it for them necessarily, but is willing to kind of stay with the gray, with all the gray involved, you know. I think that in itself will go a long way in terms of them feeling confident to approach the situation. So opening up the conversation, I think, is the first way to go, rather than thinking to yourself, okay, what do I tell them to do?
Right,
You know?
because in a school, if a child gets hit by somebody and then that child, the other child goes after that other child, you know, and retaliates,
Yeah.
then they're both in trouble. So, and they get both called in. So, but yet, on the other hand, you know, you don't want somebody to be so passive that that keeps happening.
Yeah.
We
yeah,
usually
exactly.
call both. If we have a situation where there is aggression, we call both. We do talk to the victim, you know, to make sure they're okay. And I think it's good to do it in front of the aggressor, to talk to the victim, just to so the other person has developed some empathy on, look what happened, even if without words, but saying, how do you feel? I'm sorry. Are you hurt? You know, just acknowledging first the person that received the aggression. And then what we do here, depends on the age, right, what we do, but let's say with older kids, they do have a conversation, and then we just come up with solutions. Sometimes the solutions are to write a letter to the other child, or to say something. Sometimes it's writing, or sometimes drawing a picture. And then I think that visual aid also will help them for next time to realize, okay, what I did last time hurt the other person, because also it depends on the reaction of the other child, right? Sometimes something very simple or something
Bothers them.
that will not bother somebody but will bother another person. So I think the limit is there. If it bothers, then you have to stop. It could be a teasing. I mean, I'm not talking about the extreme of bullying, but
No,
something
I know exactly
teasing,
what
you
you're
know,
saying.
poking somebody.
Somebody will look at somebody crooked and say, you hurt my feelings, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, poking the other person, and for somebody it's funny, and for the other person
Right,
it's not,
exactly.
right? So it's
No,
really
exactly, right.
Classic.
And I think also,
like
what-
poking the shoulder.
The other thing too, though, in a school like this, you know, it's a little bit easier because you probably have people that choose this school probably have the same kind of values, and they will go along with what, you know, the program is, because they chose this school. In a public school, it's very different because you have a diversity of mindsets, a diversity of values, and what one parent thinks is appropriate, another parent probably could really, you know, recoil from. So it's very difficult.
That's why workshops are so important.
Yeah.
Right,
Like
that's
you
what I'm
said,
saying.
You know,
You have-
educating
you
the
have to,
parents,
yeah.
or just
Right.
trying to be talking, dialoguing with parents.
Well, we're
Right.
fortunate though that you handle it that way.
I know.
And I'll tell you, I've been on both sides, right? The aggressor and the victim, right? I've been on both sides, but I think sometimes the work that you do with the kids carries through. I remember Leo, this is very minor, but he was little. I think he was like 6 or 7, and he was doing a soccer workshop, and there was one kid that was, you know, pushing all of the other ones, right? So he's like, well, we don't know what to do about it. And he's like, I don't, you know, and here I am.
He was in the
Okay,
soccer
well, it's
team.
like
or-
like a workshop, like a summer thing,
Hmm.
and you know, okay, you know, do your best to talk to, you know, I'm going through that whole thing. Finally, he goes, well, we had a meeting. So what happened was
Yeah,
they
we
all
do
linked
meetings all the
arms.
time.
There was like 7 of them, one of him. So they had a meeting. They all linked arms, and when he came over, they all gave him like a little shove.
That
So
was the solution.
That
they
was
found.
the solution. Now they didn't knock him down or anything, but they all worked it out. I was like, I didn't tell you to do that, but okay.
They probably wanted to make the other child feel how it felt. You
Right,
know?
but they were
'Cause sometimes that's what happens. You know, the other child doesn't realize. So if you have a meeting and you have a dialogue,
but there
at
were no
least
adults
you
involved.
can bring some light to the other person, you know, to the aggressor, and say, so they realize, and little by little, hopefully they will
I'm just
change their
using that
behavior.
as it's kind of funny when you think about it. But it wasn't horrible, but you know.
Kids find
He's
very
asking me,
harsh
I don't know what to
solutions.
say.
We'll talk about that. In the positive discipline workshop too, they do find solutions. Sometimes they're very harsh on themselves too. Yeah.
That's true.
But I think it's important to remind kids that their words have a lot of impact, and even something that you said, like, that hurt my feelings. A statement like that,
Yeah.
it goes a long way,
Mm-hmm.
and something that's so direct, especially if someone hurt them in a way, whether it's physical or emotional, teasing.
Mhm.
It's like when you poked me, it hurt me. Like a statement like that is
Yes.
so
Yeah.
powerful, and it's easily digestible to the other person. So it's important, I think, to remind the kids that even a statement like that has a lot of, like, it goes a long way.
Well, we
Yeah.
give when they are younger, especially we give them
Exactly.
the words sometimes because they don't know what to say.
Right.
They know they feel not right about it, but they don't know how to express it. So many times you have to give them the words, even if it's just 2 words, and then they will develop. I think what is the emotional intelligence that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Different intelligences. The
Right.
emotional intelligence develops playing, socializing.
And those are tools you carry through your whole life. I mean, I still use it now. If I'm in an argument with my mother or my sibling, I'll say, you know, what you told me just then really hurt my feelings. And they're like, oh my gosh. It's a moment of realization. But also I ask the same from them. It's like, okay, explain to me like how what I said made you feel. Something like that. And they'll say, well, you know, when you said X, it made me really angry. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah, and some
I
people
can
have
understand that.
thicker skins than others, you know.
Yes, but with little kids, I think we have to sometimes not tell them what to say, but just try to help them understand that it's okay that they felt bad about something, and that sometimes clarifying or giving them 2 or 3 words is all they need, because then they can use that.
But
For
you
protection,
still have them
right?
work it out, which is good.
Yes,
Because it does pack more of a punch, so to speak, when the children are saying it to each other rather than a parent or a teacher
Completely.
jumping in. And I am
Oh, yes.
guilty of
Mhm.
jumping in every time. So I,
No, and we
instead
see
of
them-
speaking,
We see
Let
them
them
working out
say.
solutions constantly. I mean, I'm talking about that sometimes we need a little meeting here in special occasions, but in the playroom or outside in the playground, they have to find solutions and work out problems constantly, because that's what it is, playing, right? It brings problems that they have to solve. And so it's a great learning experience, playing, in all senses.
Yeah, I look forward to talking about that topic more, because the bullying
yeah.
thing, because the way that schools I think generally handle this issue undermines everything that we're talking about here today. So it does. I mean, not this, but
Well, there's a whole process
most-
in schools for bullying.
Yeah, I know.
Trust me, there's a whole legal
Oh,
process.
Oh my
I
God.
know.
Yeah.
Legal process?
It's extensive,
Yes.
and it's
Yeah.
extensive, and I think in some ways it does more harm than good. So I look forward to talking about that more. I have a lot of thoughts about that. So we're probably close to the hour end. Yeah. So we can either sign off for the people online, or I wanted to end by talking about what people made with the Play-Doh. It looks like some people may have made things and then deconstructed them already, but that's okay. Like, you probably remember what you made. So I wanted to take the chance to go around and ask people what they made and what the significance was of what they made, if there was any significance. There must be some, even a little.
I don't know. I
significance,
made a
so.
circle and I just kept, I don't know, I rolled it like dough, like I was making Christmas cookies. That's my significance.
Okay,
I don't know.
Christmas cookies. Okay, so a connection to the season and the holidays that are coming up. Yeah.
I just made a flower.
Oh,
that's
wow.
so pretty.
Yeah.
Creative.
So pretty.
Wow.
Yeah, gee.
Yeah.
That's like louder
I
with the
tried
dough.
making a rose because I just liked roses,
Oh.
That's
and
nice.
this color reminded me of.
And again, let me ask you, because I used to make those flowers when I was a kid, Laura. Did you make them when you were a child? Because you know what, we used the inside part of the bread. You know the la miga, ¿cómo se dice la esa?
Like the meat of the bread, like the
Inside.
inside the crust.
No,
So
I
when
know.
we were waiting in a restaurant, let's say, or something, before, a long time ago when I was a kid, so we would do that, like empty the bread and make it into
And-
Play-Doh, basically, and then make these roses. And if they dry, then that part of the bread, when it dries, you can paint it, and actually you can make earrings, you can make all kinds of things.
Oh, really?
my goodness.
Yes, you can.
Wow.
So
no.
did you make those when you were a kid? No.
No.
Hmm.
Never thought about that.
Well, I mean, with my cousins, we did a lot of them. Many of them.
Funny.
Isn't it? With
I've
just the
noticed
inside of the
Leah-
baguette.
Yeah, Leah's done that before.
Maybe
Like,
I show her.
she just- I don't know. I'm like, what are you
Maybe
doing?
I have
With your
shown-
food?
So we can find Play-Doh anywhere.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I worked on a cube, and I just not for any specific reason other than just because it's, I guess, a known structure, and I kept trying to perfect the edges to get it. I didn't, but I just sat. It was like something mindless, so I can listen, but it gave my hands something to do.
Well, I made a little bird in a nest over here. Probably because we talk about birds often in the
Or
school.
maybe because you're pregnant.
Oh,
Yeah.
maybe because I'm pregnant.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking.
I didn't even think about that.
Yes.
That's the most obvious.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I didn't even think about that.
Oh, God.
And then I made Saturn,
Oh,
Yeah.
that's really cool.
a tiny Saturn, but he has a little place to rest here.
Aw.
Well, I try to make a ball the way I'm trying to. It's very challenging still on the wall to make it on the wall. You know, you push the finger here. And I've been making balls, practicing with balls. It's not possible without the wheel in the sense that you make it on the wheel. So then I ended up folding it like an empanada. And then this way, like an empanada too, is a different repulgue it's called. So then I just left it like that.
I didn't make much of any, I guess a ball, you know, I was rolling a ball and I didn't make much of anything, but I definitely had this in my hand most of the time I was talking and I was molding it and squishing it, and for me I think it was just helps me to kind of burn off a little bit of that excess anxiety about public speaking, you know, as I was doing this. So so I appreciate you guys sharing. Everybody kind of made something a little bit different for different reasons, you know. And I just wanted to kind of use this Play-Doh activity to highlight the fact of all the different various meanings that play has for all of us, but especially, you know, for kids. For me, it was an anxiety soothing kind of thing. For someone else, it was an opportunity to create something beautiful, right? To connect with something beautiful and create. Liza, you know, I think this was a good example of sometimes we're not even aware of the meaning behind what we're creating, but simply the act of creating has value for us anyway. So a child often, you know, I find in my office, a child will engage in a play activity or create a piece of artwork or build something in the sands, and they don't fully know consciously exactly what the meaning is behind what they're doing. But the fact is what they're creating does have meaning, and for you, maybe you weren't fully aware of the meaning of the bird in the nest, but you know,
It makes sense,
right,
definitely.
but exactly, it definitely had that layer of meaning for you, whether
Yeah.
or not you were fully aware of it. So play is valuable for that.
We actually talked about that. We just did a workshop on the importance of the arts in education, and we talked about how a child is surprised of sometimes when they draw something and what they didn't expect it. It just comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the bird on the nest.
Yeah, exactly. I felt bad squishing it.
Back into the
Back into its little tin. But
All right, so.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.